It was the horses that told him first. Not a sound from the sky, not a light on the horizon. The horses. On the evening of Sunday, May 31st, 2026, Magleo was on his farm in Campo Largo, a rural property 70 kilometers from Curitiba in the interior of Paraná, Brazil. He had lived there long enough to know his animals. All 280 of them rescued dogs, chickens, goats, horses, each with their own rhythm, their own patterns of behavior at dusk. That evening, the rhythm broke. The horses were running, not grazing, not settling for the night. Running. The dogs would not stop. Across species, across the property, something had shifted. Mick walked the perimeter. No storm on the horizon, no predator tracks. And then, near the tree line, he found the electric fence. Down. No explanation for how, no explanation for when. He looked up. What he saw over the forest that night has since been viewed by millions of people and explained by no one. Subscribe right now. The next 20 minutes will connect dots you didn't know existed. You'll rewatch this. Don't miss what's coming. What you are about to follow is not a social media story. It is a documented sequence of physical events that occurred within a single time window on a single property and produced multiple independent streams of evidence: animal behavior, physical damage, audio, and visual footage that no single conventional explanation accounts for simultaneously. We will move through that evidence in the order it appeared. First, the animals, then the ground, then the object itself, and then the context that makes Campo Largo not an anomaly, but the latest entry in a pattern that Brazilian authorities have been documenting and not explaining for 40 years. By the end of this investigation, you will not have a definitive answer, but you will understand precisely why the absence of that answer is the most significant fact in this case. The evidence begins on the ground before anything appeared in the sky, and the ground does not lie. 280 animals do not panic at the same moment without a cause. That is not an opinion. That is basic animal behavior science. Prey animals, horses, goats, chickens maintain what researchers call a collective vigilance threshold. They share sensory information across a herd or flock. When one detects a threat, the alarm spreads. But for an entire mixed species population to enter simultaneous agitation, the stimulus must be strong enough and broad enough to cross every species barrier at once. On the evening of May 31st, that is exactly what happened on Mick's property. The horses were the first visible sign, running along the fence line, not grazing. The dogs, then the smaller animals. Mike's initial instinct was rational. A large predator. In rural Paraná, onças, jaguars menos, are not unknown. He began checking the perimeter with that assumption in mind. Stop and translate that into physical reality. A jaguar would produce a directional response. Animals on one side of the property would react. Those on the other side would not yet know. What Mick observed was not directional. It was simultaneous. The entire population of that farm, across its full geographic spread, entered distress at the same time. No jaguar produces that signature. He found no tracks, no physical evidence of a predator. What he found instead was the electric fence down in a section of the property bordering the forest and the river. Not broken, not down, as if something had passed through or over it with enough force or proximity to disable it, without leaving the kind of damage a falling tree or a large animal would produce. The standard explanation for a downed electric fence is equipment failure or weather. That night, there was no storm. The equipment had been functioning normally that morning. The answer to what dropped that fence has not been established, but the timeline is clear. The animals reacted before Mick saw anything in the sky. The fence was already down when he arrived at the tree line. Whatever caused both of those things was present on that property before the lights appeared. That is not a theory. That is the sequence of events as documented. And the sequence was only beginning. An electric fence does not fall by itself, and it does not fall silently. Mike described the sounds that accompanied that evening in specific terms, not generic noise. Specific acoustic signatures, a ratchet-like clicking, metallic in quality, rhythmic, a low rumble beneath it, and something he described as a roar. Not animal, not mechanical in any familiar sense, but somewhere between the two. Consider what that means. Sound requires a source. These were not sounds he recognized from years of rural life. A man who lives with 280 animals on a working farm in the interior of Parana knows what the night sounds like. He knew what he was hearing was different. Different enough that he pulled out his phone and began recording before he had anything visual to show. The sounds came from the forest and the river area, the same zone where the fence had fallen, independent of any visual sighting. The acoustic evidence alone places an unidentified source in a specific geographic location on that property. What produces a ratchet-like metallic sound in a forest at night, with no machinery operating in the area? Wind does not produce rhythmic metallic clicking. Animals do not produce low mechanical rumbles. The nearest explanation in the public record for that acoustic combination, rhythmic metallic sound, low-frequency rumble, associated with aerial proximity, comes from military and civilian UAP reports filed across 3 continents over the past 30 years. In several of those reports, witnesses described the same ratchet or gear-like sound associated with low-altitude objects that have no visible propulsion system. Mick had no access to those reports. He was a farmer on a dark property trying to understand what his animals were reacting to. Researchers from Anubis, the National and International UFO Agency, a Brazilian organization that investigates UAP cases, subsequently traveled to Campo Largo to document the site. They were looking specifically for physical trace evidence, ground impressions, electromagnetic anomalies, radiation signatures. Their findings have not yet been released in full, but their decision to mobilize for an on-site investigation is itself significant. Anubis does not dispatch field teams for every viral video. The irony here is precise. The most compelling evidence from that night is not in the footage. It is in the fence and the sounds to physical facts that exist entirely independently of any camera, any algorithm, and any question of video authenticity. Both remain unexplained, and neither prepares you for what Mick saw when he finally looked up. What Mick drew from memory that night does not match any aircraft in the public record. He drew it because he was afraid of forgetting the details. That instinct, the investigator's instinct, the need to document before memory degrades, produced a description specific enough to be evaluated against known aerial objects, and the evaluation is unambiguous. He described an eye-shaped structure, not circular, not triangular, eye-shaped, wider at the center, narrowing at both ends, with a red light concentrated on the lower surface, and a sound he characterized as a gear mechanism, the same ratchet quality he had heard from the forest, now clearly associated with the object overhead. Translate that scale into something physical. Mick estimated the object at between 50 and 70 meters in length. 50 meters is the approximate fuselage length of a Boeing 737. 70 meters exceeds it. He was looking at something the size of a commercial aircraft, hovering stationary over the river and the forest at the edge of his property, with its lights active, for 20 to 40 minutes. No conventional aircraft hovers silently at that scale. Helicopters of that size do not exist in civilian or known military inventories. The largest military helicopter in current operation, the Russian Mi-26, measures 33 meters in length and produces an unmistakable rotor signature audible. for kilometers. Drones of that scale are not in public circulation. Blimps do not emit red underlighting or gear sounds, and do not move with the behavioral pattern Mate described. Because the object did not remain stationary. After 20 to 40 minutes over the river and forest, it extinguished its lights, and then it moved toward the house. A deliberate change of position after a prolonged stationary period in the direction of the only inhabited structure on the property. Mate, by his own account, experienced a crisis of anxiety at that point. He did not approach. He documented what he could from a distance and remained inside. The footage he captured shows a luminous point above the tree line, pulsing, stationary, over an area of dense forest and river. It does not show the full structure he described. Cell phone cameras in low-light rural conditions do not capture what the human eye resolves at distance. That limitation is not evidence of fabrication. It is the standard constraint of mobile imaging technology at night. What the footage cannot show, the physical description documented in real time. Consistent across multiple tellings, specific enough to exclude every conventional explanation, fills in with a precision that is difficult to dismiss. But the most unsettling part is still ahead. Because Campo Largo is not the first time Brazil has stood in front of something in the sky and received no official answer, and the precedent is not folklore. It is in the Air Force's own files. Brazil has been here before, and the Air Force has the radar logs to prove it. May 19th, 1986. Not a rural farm. The controlled airspace of one of South America's most sophisticated air traffic networks. At approximately 8 in the evening, radar operators at Sindacta, the Integrated Center for Air Defense and Air Traffic Control in São Paulo, began tracking anomalous signatures. Objects appeared on multiple independent radar screens simultaneously. They moved at speeds inconsistent with any known aircraft. They stopped, changed direction, disappeared, reappeared elsewhere. At the same moment, commercial pilots on active flights were reporting by radio lights that paced their aircraft, approached, and withdrew at velocities no commercial or military jet of that era could match. Controllers at airports in São Paulo, Brasilia, Anápolis, and Rio de Janeiro were all tracking the same event. The Brazilian Air Force scrambled interceptor jets. The jets found nothing they could engage. The objects outmaneuvered them without apparent effort. The official mission report, filed that night, described aerial phenomena that could not be identified, could not be intercepted, and could not be explained by any known technology. That report was classified. It remained classified for 33 years. In 2019, under Brazil's access to information legislation, it was partially declassified. What it confirms is not extraordinary in the conspiratorial sense. It is extraordinary in the precise, technical sense. Trained radar operators, commercial pilots, and military aviators all documented the same objects independently across hundreds of kilometers of Brazilian airspace on the same night, and no explanation was ever formally issued. Now plays Campo Largo inside that pattern. Rural location, animal disturbance preceding any visual event, physical trace evidence on the ground, an object that does not match known aircraft profiles. And after the event, no official investigation, no Air Force statement, no government response of any kind. The institutional silence after May 31st, 2026 follows the same pattern as the institutional silence after May 19th, 1986. 40 years apart, the same absence of answer. What does it mean when a pattern repeats across 4 decades and the official response remains identical? That question does not have a comfortable answer, but it has an honest one. The term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, replaced UFO in official scientific and military language for a specific reason. UFO carried cultural baggage that made serious investigation harder. OOP is a classification of epistemic status, not of It means this aerial event cannot be categorized with the data currently available. That classification is now used by the United States Department of Defense, NASA, and a growing number of international defense agencies. It does not mean extraterrestrial. It does not mean secret military. It means unidentified, and that the identification has not been achieved despite the application of available analytical tools. The Campo Largo case, evaluated against UAP criteria, presents a convergence that researchers consider significant. Most UAP reports contain one anomalous element: unusual light, unusual speed, unusual shape. Investigators apply Occam's razor, the simplest explanation consistent with available evidence. A single anomalous light over a rural area is most likely a drone, a weather balloon, or atmospheric optics. Those explanations are applied first, and they account for the majority of reports. What makes Campo Largo different is the convergence of independent evidence streams. The animal behavior anomaly is one stream. It has a specific profile, simultaneous cross-species, before any visual event that is not produced by conventional stimuli. The physical trace evidence is a second stream. The downed fence and the acoustic signatures exist independently of the footage and independently of each other. The visual and descriptive evidence is a third stream. The object's characteristics, scale, shape, stationary duration, behavioral pattern exclude the standard explanations, individually and collectively. 3 independent streams. Same location. Same time window. 3 independent streams pointing to the same location, the same time window, and the same conclusion. Something was present on that property that has not been identified. The honest scientific position is not certainty in either direction. It is the acknowledgement that the evidence warrants investigation that has not yet occurred. Anubis has mobilized. No government agency has followed. That gap between what the evidence demands and what the institutions have provided is itself a data point. And it is the same data point Brazil generated in 1986. The investigation is not closed. It has not formally opened. Here is what the evidence from Campo Largo actually establishes. Something occurred on that property on the night of May 31st, 2026, that produced physical effects across multiple independent systems: biological, structural, acoustic, visual, and that no available explanation accounts for in full. That is not a claim about origin. It is a claim about the limits of our current knowledge, and that is where the real question lives. Not in what the object was, but in what our response to it reveals. The instinct, when confronted with something that does not fit the available categories, is to find the category that fits least badly and apply it. Drone hoax, atmospheric anomaly. The discomfort of genuine uncertainty is harder to hold than a wrong answer confidently stated. Migleo, a farmer who rescues animals and shares his rural life with strangers on the internet, sat alone in the dark after the lights disappeared and drew what he had seen from memory. Not for an audience, for himself. So he would not forget. There is something in that image that stays with you. A man, a pencil, a piece of paper, and a shape in the sky that he could not name. Some questions do not resolve. They only deepen. The next mystery is already waiting. Subscribe now and be there when we open it.